Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Building Worlds Union Artistic Collaboration Panel. My name is Jen Sunshine, and I am your panel facilitator for today. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are gathering this live stream from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and more broadly on Turtle Island. I recognize that some of us may be joining from different places and that therefore you work in a different traditional Indigenous territory. I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on that and acknowledge the land that you're on. Today's panel is co-hosted by Sin Evolution and the Get It Together workshop series on the artistic collaboration that made Union a reality. Co-created by Kieran Bumbar and Nancy Lee, Union is a speculative sci-fi exhibition centered around a narrative of two beings discovering their ancestral memories through the longing for touch and the rituals practiced in their post-apocalyptic wedding ceremony. The exhibition incorporates XR, performance, sculpture, multi-channel sound, and video installation. Today, Nancy and Kieran are taking a back seat, but are in attendance as active audience members. Today's panel is really about the art of collaboration, featuring 6 artist collaborators who helped facilitate the aesthetic world building and narrative development of Union. They will share behind-the-scenes details from their creative process and contributions to the conceptual development of the exhibition. I also want to acknowledge that these are only 6 collaborators out of over 20 collaborators in total, and it's also very important to name the other collaborators who made this union a possibility. Sammy Chen, Pia Massey, Eli Moreau, Lane Butler, Josue Sanchez, Emelina Fredrickson, Tamar Tabori, Cyrell Gonzalez, and Sammy Jo Rambawa. So today is very exciting because this is the first time that everyone is gathering today. I want to introduce our 6 panelists today, and this will also serve as the order in which they'll present. Venomous, Ian Nakamoto, Adam Lim Bungag, Rio Kwan, Connor Singh Vanderbeek, and last but not least, Alex Zedchevich. A reminder to panelists that you each have 5 to 10 minutes to present. Given the size of the panel, please do try to stick to that time frame so that others have enough time to present. At the 9-minute mark, Nancy or Karen will give you a 1-minute warning, either through chat or text. And once we are well over the 12-minute mark, I will have no choice but to verbally interrupt you. After all 6 have presented, we'll jump into a Q&A with everyone before wrapping at 6 o'clock. So without further ado, I welcome our first collaborator, Venomous.
Hi everyone, my name is Venomous. I'm part of Venomous Studios, a design studio that I founded myself. This presentation goes over the branding that we did for Union and the various key players or key elements of the story. So the first one I want to go through is art. When Nancy and Kieran came up to me and told me about this incredible world that they've created, I honestly didn't know where to start. So the first thing we did was talk about the various different key players in the world. And then within each of those key players, we tried to figure out how to communicate the story behind the branding. So for art in particular, it was conceived as a currency, but also a memory device and a scanning device. What I did was create a mood board that had various different things that we could take as inspiration from current present day and basically imagine what it could be in the future. So some of these things would include what are some kinds of scanning devices that we use in present day. So for instance, a lot of it is QR codes, or UPC codes, or nowadays we have also these interesting Spotify codes or Facebook Messenger, Snapchat codes that have a lot of different kinds of lines and shapes. But then also at the same time, just looking at other kind of futuristic designs that also influenced or things that related to like hazardous signs as well. So with those things in mind, we designed a couple different options here. As you can see, there are elements of the UPC code and elements of these kinds of like circular and more rounded, softer shapes as well. But we looked at it as various different ways of what could that scanning be like. One of the things Nancy and Kieran mentioned is that sometimes the arc symbol would be behind our necks. So we thought of it as like a round circular object that you could either have imprinted or tattooed on the back of your neck. At the time, I was thinking about Dark Angel, if anyone's ever seen that show. This is basically what we ended up with. It's really great to see also these elements being used throughout the exhibition. This is an example from the piece that Sammy Chen did. Next thing we looked at was Gaia. And for Gaia, we're looking at a post-apocalyptic world, a place where, anything can happen, and in this virtual world, we're inundated by advertisements and propaganda and just kind of the most futuristic scenario we could think of. I compiled some of these images for our mood board. Some of the questions that we came across were, if this was like a government authority, like what kind of branding would they want to present to us? In a lot of other kinds of like media, whether it's like video games or film, certain government authorities sometimes have an authoritarian style logo and branding. But in other cases, sometimes it's more clean, or sometimes it's more friendly. This is an example from Jung Boon-ho's Okja film. Anyone's seen that? So basically, it kind of narrowed it down to whether we wanted the world to be the government to be more friendly and futuristic, or more authoritative and futuristic. And there is something really menacing about having something that seems really friendly and sweet and easy to access, but underneath the exterior have some kind of like ulterior motive. So that's why we ended up going a more like friendly, trustworthy route. So originally we went in this direction, but we ended up here. So I have two examples here. One is a smaller one, one is a close-up version. But essentially we wanted to show that there was some inner workings behind the whole Gaia government. So these are like two little cogs that we use, but usually when you see the logo at really much smaller size, they actually look like flowers. So that was one thing that was kind of a fun little add-on. Like the humans that are utilizing Gaia or having to work with Gaia are essentially all part of the cogs that turn the entire wheel. The other element that we looked at was also the resistance or rebellion. Earlier, we didn't have a name at the time, but after it ended up being called what you now know as Daemon and Core. So aside from the virtual world, we're looking at a very bleak reality, something completely broken, and there's no like bright colors and lights. It's actually like a really stark reality. So in that direction, we thought about things like anarchist symbols and what kinds of like handmade symbols that we could use as inspiration for the Daemon logo. Here I have some other examples. Another thing that we thought about was water distortions. During the time we were creating this, it was during actually the Hong Kong protests, and one of the slogans of the protest really resonated, and it was "Be like water." So that was another thing we thought about in terms of what about utilizing water as an element, a design element. So when choosing a typeface, one of the options we have at the very top here was kind of like water or almost like virus-like, molecular-like. But we also looked at other options where we had more of a traditional sans serif font, but with slight deviations. And of course, the very handmade, hand spray painted, like traditional old school anarchist look. With that, we looked at creating what the actual logo could be. One of the key things that Nancy and Kieran mentioned is they wanted something that anyone could draw, anyone could create. We originally started off with these kinds of scratches when originally the name was Resistance, but as it changed to Daemon, we had also other shapes, but also perhaps like characters that we played around with. It ended up being this D logo with the little orbs that you see in the bottom left corner. We also ended up choosing that watery virus-like typeface as well. And so here are some of the different things that we explored. One of the things that was great about the logo is that it already kind of looked like a network. So one of the things we did was explore what that could look like as an interleaved object or web of sorts. So here are a bunch of different explorations for. So although I was working on the design, I loved how everything kind of developed a mind of its own. I had nothing to do with the film, which was incredibly made, by the way. But here are some of where those designs ended up in the film. The other pieces that I worked on were the 3 propaganda posters. So some of the things that we looked at for this part, we looked at actual propaganda posters as inspiration, but we also looked at like different designs of like faces, and we also thought about the virtual world as like an AI created world. Here are some GAN AI modeled landscapes.
Let's start wrapping up.
Yes. Okay, so anyway, we had some various different options, but this is where we ended up. And actually, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Venomous. Next, we have Ian Nakamoto. Take it away, Ian.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Oh, yes, nobody else can speak. Hi, so I'm Ian Nakamoto. I produced some sculpture for this project, but we actually began with a scanning process. So I'm going to share that, and we can take a look at it step by step. So we didn't actually start with the idea of producing a physical sculpture. There was the idea of 3D printing something because I work in the field of additive manufacturing, 3D printing, but we hadn't really decided what that was going to be. All that we knew was that we were going to be using scanning and printing in some capacity. And we began by looking at the things that you could do with scanning related to the figure that are challenging to produce through a process of traditional sculpture. Yeah, there we go. So we started with a series of scans of Kieran and Nancy, trying to explore different poses. The idea was to explore the idea of intimacy in relation to the concept of union. We went through, I think, about 50 different poses. These were produced with a handheld white light scanner. I'm afraid I don't have any video of it because it tends to play very choppy on Zoom, but it is a handheld device that flashes a high intensity light. It essentially brings into the computer a 3D model of what you're pointing it at. So one of the things that we really tried to focus on here in the scanning process was fabrics. We did a lot of poses with blankets and sheets that would be very difficult to sculpt traditionally. So I was thinking a lot about classical references here. So things like Pieta, a lot of Bernini pieces. And that's why we spent so much time, again, dealing with hands and interaction between bodies, because it's one thing to sculpt a figure in a pose that is completely neutral. It's a much more complicated thing to produce a figure in a pose that is interacting with another figure. And it's that dynamic interaction between the two figures that we were really interested in exploring. So this was a very challenging process, I think, for Nancy and Kieran. This one here is quite a relaxed pose. So that was one where they got to take a break, but holding still while having a scanner sort of slowly passed around you is quite challenging. So I commend them for their hard work there. So one of the first things that we were able to do with this data is turn it into renders. So this is one of the images produced for the show. I believe this was used on some of the posters and at the entrance to the show. But this is a fairly unmodified scan. There's a shader that's been applied to it, etc. We're drawing on ideas of the air apocalypse that has occurred in the narrative. So you have the smoke in the background and so on. But this was a relatively easy one. Where it got more complicated was when we decided that what we wanted to do with the scans was produce a sculpture. And the idea, the reference was objects of worship. I think the phrase goddesses got tossed around occasionally, but the idea that the sculpture represented a artifact from within the narrative, maybe further in the future than the where the video is situated, where the two characters that Nancy and Kieran play are celebrated. So I was drawing a lot on Italian and like Roman artwork, in particular images of emperors, images of gods and goddesses, things like that. And one of these areas in particular where this was very challenging was the hair and the details of the hands and bodies where they interact. The scanning actually doesn't really pick up detail like that. So all of those areas had to be manually sculpted. And that gave us a lot of opportunity for drawing on these classical references. So for example, Nancy's hair was sort of modeled after something in between maybe an anime haircut and the Moreau head, which was very well preserved head that was buried under temple steps, I believe. But just trying to stylize it there and reference these other pieces. There's a Bernini piece there as well with the hands, and that's something that I was thinking about a lot when we were selecting this pose and refining the back here. I don't want to talk too much about it, but the process here was a big part of it. It's a physically existing sculpture. It's a life-sized piece, or very, very close to it. I think it's something like 98% life-sized. So it was segmented and 3D printed on some of my printers. Most of the body parts were printed in a traditional 3D printing process. You can see the machines there. This became very difficult because of the number of mechanical malfunctions we had to deal with during this process. So that was certainly one of my strongest memories of this. And then the elements like the hands and the heads were printed in a second set of machines that I run that are a higher resolution material. So there's Kieran's head, there's Nancy's head. And the design, after it had been digitally sculpted, was segmented, printed in these pieces, and then Nancy did a tremendous amount of work. I helped as well. Quite a few other people helped as well. But Nancy did I would say most of the work there, sanding down the layer lines in the print. The body really required the most work. And then it was glued together, painted, and went to White Monkey for painting and finishing. And the end result is what you see in the gallery. We tried really hard to accomplish the very smooth surface finish. I think it's one of the first things that people notice. And it's really referencing the classical works in marble, in stone, but of course it's been achieved with plastic, which I think is, relates narratively to the story idea as well. Now, the reason why we settled on this pose in particular, there's a few different reasons, but the primary one was that the figure is situated in between the two-channel film, incredible film, I have to say, and the idea of having the figures facing the two screens really resonated with us, and I think works quite well in the space. I have another screenshot. Oh, I have another set of screenshots here, kind of showing the way it looks in the space. I think it works very well to have the two figures facing each other. There's moments in the film that I thought were really incredible, where you can see the close-up portraits of them looking at each other, and there's a connection. And I think the sculpture gets a chance to interact with the video in those moments as well. So that was really the intent there. That pretty much covers it. I would say that there's some other details I could talk about in terms of the technical process, but I think that might be better to cover in the Q&A if anybody's interested, because otherwise it can get very granular.
Thanks, Ian. You're right on time. The next artist I want to invite up is Adam.
I just want to say, starting off, thanks to Ian for the scans, because that was like definitely very cool. And like I was saying in the chat, like I would put that on a shirt. Those scans are incredible. I think starting off this project, I don't know if Nancy, you can hear me, if you could pull up some slides, please. Thanks, Nancy. When Nancy and Kieran hit me up for this project, it was pretty, it was like very one-dimensional. It was like wedding dresses. Okay, cool. Like no idea what the world was like, no idea what was kind of involved with all of that. I think in our first meeting, it was kind of getting a bite into the world, and it was a kind of a toss-up between again, culture and then also like the future, like what does that look like? And you know, through the pandemic as well, making these garments was, you know, so much fun, and having those meetings was like kind of my only social interaction, and it kept me very positive and excited to do something you know, every day. So that was kind of like a really good experience with this project. I think when it came to creative direction with the world building, it was you know, the first iterations were very culture heavy. If you could slide forward 2 slides, Nancy, if you can hear me. There you go. As you can see, it's like we're drawing very big inspiration from Chinese culture. And then if you could do one more slide, we could see the Kieran's outfit, which was very inspired by Indian culture, Pakistani culture, and kind of hit a problem because, you know, it is possible to, you know, for me, I'm a Filipino-born Canadian citizen. I'm not Indian, I'm not Chinese. So is it really appropriate for me to be making a Chinese or Indian wedding dress? So those were kind of some moral dilemmas and creative dilemmas that I've experienced in this project, you know. And as we kept going into the, you know, conversation of like world building and what does that look like, we kind of decided that you have to kind of create your own culture in a way, you know, in the world, you know, it's an apocalypse. Everything is gone, everything has been eradicated, and now this foreign body is taken over Gaia. And, you know, no one really remembers those things. And the things you do remember are commodities and is sold to other people and etc. So it was really hard to like distinguish like how much culture could we implement into the design process of a garment. So we have one slide here, it's culture creation, like utilizing the created culture within ourselves, the diversity of like how we experience culture. You know, from again being second generation Filipino, my Filipino culture is not as the same as like my mom's idea of culture, the same way that Nancy and Kieran's diversity in their own culture. And I think experiencing that was kind of experience someone else's relationship with their own culture is so beautiful. And I think I really appreciated their vulnerability with me, because, you know, usually when you make wedding dresses is very, very personal, and it's a very big ceremony with all of it. It's a big moment in Westernized culture and in Asian culture, East Indian culture. And so for me, I wanted to make sure that I respected how they viewed their relationship with marriage, and that kind of complexity of being queer and not really 100% in their culture. So that was really a great experience to deal with. If you could do the next slide. This is where we were very, very deep into inherited culture, this idea of really using obvious symbolism for the culture. I actually played with these ideas of like, you know, maybe they found these pieces in the rubble of this like dead world. It's like tattered, and like they're clinging on to this culture, that has been destroyed because of an apocalypse and all the crazy stuff that happens in this world. We kind of settled on culture creation. Obviously, you see the dresses, they're very, very texturized. They're very futuristic. It's very metallic, and I feel like it was the right way to go, since, what does it even mean to hold on to culture that, I think Nancy said this in one of her tours I really connected with. It's like, why would you, hold on to this culture when your culture doesn't really care about you, in a way that, like, in the lens of queerness and not really being 100% part of that culture. And for me personally, I really connected with that, and I was like, that really like solidified my relationship to kind of these dresses, since I didn't want to do something pretty. I didn't want to do something like traditional, because that's not really me. So yeah, if you can go to a couple next slides again, you can see how the iteration really went from like very big and very traditional into kind of minimal but very rigid. I got very inspired by Evangelion and Futurism and like metal. Very structured, because most of the traditional dresses tend to have flowy elements that I thought were very soft and didn't really live in the world. I think a big question that we dealt with was textiles in a world where there's an air apocalypse. There's no more cotton. There's no more linen. There's no more silk, because it's all gone. So I really was left with, what does that even look like? And I landed on, okay, well, we have to do PVC, because plastics are probably the future, which is not really positive thinking, because that is probably where we're going to go towards in our own reality. But in this world of Gaia, it was really difficult to pinpoint what kind of textiles lived in this world. And towards the end of the creation of the gowns themselves, we had these tough questions like, what do closures look like? What do these things look like in this world? And for most of the video, you see them in these latex garments that look very much, what's the word I'm looking for? I was very inspired by a lot of the futuristic movies where they give you like a set sort of clothes, and these are your clothes that you're issued. And they have identifiers, and this is like what you wear all day. It trying to just strip away individuality in a way. And I thought, those latex suits were very much an afterthought, and they kind of really played very well into the theme because of, they just really played well. And I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. And I think another problem another thing that really stood out to me with, when it came to color scheme and, what it should look like in the world. Again, like I said, Ian's scans, I was really given the first reference photo of Ian's scans, and I was really, really into this red, like these red lines. And in traditional clothing in Indian and Chinese culture, red is a symbolic color. And I thought, you can't be white for sure, because white doesn't live very well in a dystopian world. It kind of looks utopian in a way if you use white. So I chose a very stark and high contrast color scheme that felt very texturized and felt very different because of how it was structured and how it didn't feel pretty, and it didn't feel like a traditional wedding dress. But there are elements to the silhouette that kind of hint and remind of certain things that in a past life almost. But it was really difficult through the pandemic to get all these different textiles in. And I do appreciate Nancy and Kieran's patience through all of that. I mean, it was definitely hard to not have any swatches or any available things to give them through the process, because there was like nothing available through through the pandemic. And so I 100% appreciate the faith and the support through all of that. And I'm just really happy with the way they turned out. It's pretty wild, a lot of hours of just sewing and iterations and sampling. And I think where we ended up was a very, very, very structural piece that I was super proud of, that really stood out, that felt like it didn't play to any norms that I think Nancy O'Keefe played to anyways. So I was really happy with how it all turned out. I think that's it from me.
Great. Thank you so much, Adam. That was captivating. I forgot to mention to the audience that are tuning in to feel free to use the chat function to input any questions or comments or observations as they are coming up during each presentation. So feel free to use the chat. Next up is, I believe, Rio Kwan.
Hey everyone. I was the production designer for Union, and when Nancy first came to me with this project, I got really excited because I had been working on a lot of commercials, and so to be able to have a lot of creative freedom was really, really great. So I appreciate that. The biggest thing for me with Union was how do we create these three separate worlds? And without taking away from the story and taking away from the beautiful costumes that Adam had created. And so the biggest thing that I like to use to keep something minimal is texture and light and shadow. So I'll just screen share this. Hold on a second. So the biggest focuses for me were the dystopian world and like the ritual and the union. And I had watched, I think it's THX 1138 is is George Lucas's first film. And so I pulled a lot of inspiration from that because it's very futuristic. It's super minimal, but it really gets like the message across. And so I went down. Oh, also dystopian world is there's no organic materials. So we were like, how do we play with plastic basically? And so I went down a plastic rabbit hole on the internet, and I found this one photo in particular. It's like black garbage bag, but it's got some plastic over top of it. And so we decided that what if we just made a huge wall of that and then used light to kind of manipulate the different worlds. Kieran was orange and Nancy was we used blue. And also like other furniture and stuff we needed to use. So, bubble wrap, just anything that wasn't organic material basically. So I'll just go to, so that's the inspiration of the photo, or inspiration photo. And then this is all of it on the floor. I don't even know how many garbage bags we used, but a lot of garbage bags, a lot of glue, and just kind of like manipulated the plastic. So it kind of gave this cool texture. And so, there you can see it up on the wall there. I think it was like 40 by 40 feet or something. And then there you can see, so how different, like the light creates a very different mood in each set. And then this was some of the props. So in the dystopian world, they only got fed this like one bun basic, or these certain buns. And so you can see the logo on there as well. And then this was using bubble wrap with light. And I think there was a light mat under there as well. And that's with the medical tools there. And then this was ritual and like the union. So to take away from like this like kind of dark, desolate, post-apocalyptic world, and coming into the ritual and union, we wanted to create something that was soft and ethereal and intimate. And so we used these like really drapey silks. And for this, I don't know if anyone's like seen the cell. I know the cell's really scary, but a lot of the like dream sequences, they're very dramatic. And so when I was thinking of the silk and with their costumes, that's what I thought of right away. So kind of wanted to create a world kind of like that without taking away from their dresses. Oops. And so yeah, you can see here with the union dresses, we didn't use, I think we just used regular lights, like no colored light, because the dresses are so strong. We wanted them to come across like that, so without getting lost in the background. And then here's just like some installation. So basically we wanted to like, how can we bring the set into the gallery? And we ended up almost covering all the walls with the original backdrop that we had used, as well as bringing the silk into where the projection was. So the viewers were kind of getting the same experience of watching the film, and then they're also walking through it and getting able to see it. And yeah. And then those are the costumes hanging there. Oops, and I think that's actually it. Yeah, and then that's it for me.
Thank you, Rio. Next up is Connor.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank my fellow panelists. It's really amazing to see the work you all are doing and how many connections there are between each person's part and even my part. Without having met most of you, pandemic collaboration is a very strange thing for that reason. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Yeah, so I worked a lot with Kieran for this project on constructing the musical worlds of Union and how they were going to come together and what elements of world building we could do sonically that would feed into everything that was going on visually. So for that, we began with the questions, the very basic questions of what identities were Kieran and Nancy bringing in? So in terms of Indian, Punjabi, Sikh, Han Chinese, Taiwanese, Confucian, Buddhist, based on the cultural backgrounds of both Kieran and Nancy. What do we mean when we say traditional cultures in those things? Who has access to traditional cultures? Oftentimes it's the cultures of men and male performance in these cultures. And then finally, were Kieran and Nancy particularly interested in heavily leaning on this idea of culture? Was it necessary to be super Punjabi or super Han Chinese or Taiwanese? And then in addition to that, what place do these sounds have in the future? So because the world is divided into the human world / dystopia, the cyber world, and then the space of the Union, Kieran and I spent a lot of time brainstorming how we would put together the sound profile, which sounds would belong to which world, and then how we could build bridges between those worlds so that the sounds ended up being coherent. And so we based it on the guqin, which is a traditional Chinese instrument. Pardon my pronunciation of Chinese. I do not speak Chinese, so I'm going to pretend that I can read Pinyin. So this is Mei Hua San Nong, which depicts the budding of plum blossoms and is performed by Sai Shan. I'm just going to make sure I have the sound. Okay. Honestly, I could just spend my entire presentation listening to just that because it's so cool. So the guqin, I'm gonna really gloss over about 5,000 years of history. It's as old as 18th century BCE. It's very associated with aristocracy, educated elite. But since the 1980s, this sort of virtuosic performance, emotional soloist, virtuosic expressive performance of the guqin emerged in the 1980s. And from the video, you saw and heard three types of plucks. The plucking of the open string, which is a full resonant bass note connected to the earth. The pluck with the right hand and sliding and pushing down on the string with the left hand, which is dampened, it decays, and it represents humanity. And then the harmonic, that shimmering, higher pitched, pure tone associated with the heavens. And we mapped those sounds onto the sound worlds of Union. So Earth being real world / dystopia, being made up of low sort of rhythmic trudging sounds on guitar, bass, piano, with traces of human steps. This is also me sort of mapping the system onto the material that Kieran came up with, sort of like academic analyzing it or something. Humanity linked up to the cyber world, which had the very alluring and seductive voiceover along with these electronic sounds and flourishes and rapid textures to sound very lush and vibrant and tantalizing. Finally, the heavens were linked to the Union, and the sound profile was very much around the voice, around bells, and around harmonics. So again, the high-pitched, very pure resonant sounds. The hardest bit of it to work on was the Union. Again, it was the points of cultural connection for Kieran and Nancy, especially finding spaces within wedding rituals for non-normative women, for queer women, asking the questions of what wedding rituals were available for women and what wedding rituals would be available in the context of this future. And we came across the idea of a bridal lament, which is a woman's expression of grief, of being separated from her family and her past life, that is common in both Punjabi and Han Chinese culture. So I'll play a bit of sort of an iconic lament and film song from the 1957 film Mother India. You can see the Hindi romanized text up top. Pi ke ghar aaj pyari dulhania chali. Today the bride has left the house of her beloved family.
Thank you.
From there, we also looked at Chinese bridal lament. I have to thank my colleague Casper Chan, a fellow ethnomusicologist, for helping me with these materials, because he basically sent me videos and was like, here is this region, here is what's happening in this video. And so this is a video of a bridal lament in Guizhou province, which is in southwestern China.
Oh, sorry, what?
So the video here is very hectic. It's interesting to see the disconnection between the audience, which is sort of preparing for a feast, while this veiled, covered woman is crying her lungs out. It's very wrenching and difficult to watch in many ways. And so with those in mind, we brought it back to how this played into union, how these songs sung by solo female vocalists linked to identity and how they could connect with one another. Kieran and Nancy also improvised a number of jams during this process, which fed greatly into the material that went into the union piece. But we asked the question, what is a union? It is sort of a destruction of the soul, of the ego, of the self, and the creation of two souls that have united into one, and now exist together. This is very much in the sort of sick spiritual perspective on the union. The union is also a coming together of cultures, and as the previous panelists have discussed, what we define as culture, what we identify with, is very complicated for each of us, and especially when you put it in a post-apocalyptic future, there's really a lot to work with and to pack in there and to unpack out of there. And it was really rewarding and kind of incredible to see how it all came together. That's it for me, and I look forward to hearing what Alex has to say, and also to the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Connor. And last but not least, Alex.
Thanks, Connor. That was awesome. And yes, you're right. My presentation just kind of ties in onto you. And let me just start my slideshow here and share the screen. And yes, coming to what Connor was actually saying, it is amazing to actually talk about a dystopian world, but from an ethnic perspective and from a perspective of the present day. So when Kieran approached me to work on this project, it was really challenging, because challenge was to actually merge this organic sound and synthetic sound and create a really strong sounding narrative that will kind of really present what is the view of present a dystopia through a multicultural society in a sense. Me myself, I'm also faced with that same identity, that I'm from everywhere and nowhere, and brings a lot of influence of the place where I live, and also other places where I've been, and that all goes through the art that I know, and that is talking about sound. And Kieran and I both share the passion for using a space as an extended element of sound expression. So where the sound is in the space and how it's perceived, it gives it its own sonic narrative. So we mentioned before THX 1138, and the THX 1138 is one of the films that kind of converge both sonic and visual root of Union. A gentleman who is responsible for sonic world of THX 1138, his name is Walter Murch, and Walter Murch, he is a big fan of Pierre Schaeffer and Mamak Chion and the theory of sound objects. And what are the sound objects? The sound objects are the sonic representation of the physical occurrences or emulation of the physical occurrences in space, and also our interpretation of them. So Karen and I started to work on it. So now how to merge this world of organic sound, a synthetic sound, and still tell a story. Yes, this is the slide of THX 1138. That's what I talked about, and this is the theory of the sound object. And what I was referring to of the last is the structure of the sound object. So its sound object, as in theory of sonic narrative, divides in like two parts. One is objective, which is comprehension and listening, and one is a subjective of this. What are we hearing and what are we perceiving? So when we were doing our sound narrative and putting all the sonic scape together, what we needed to actually do is dissect the organic sound, a recording that we have, adapt the electronic elements of the synthesized sound so they all work in one single sonic story and one presentation. So in the recording itself, we end up with something about 8 hours of raw material that we record piano and the upright bass from the multiple sonic perspective. So every of the instruments, as you can see here, all these little tracks are basically a different microphones and the different a position of the microphone in space that we later on map to our spatialized system in Max that we use in the gallery. So it was a really long work of almost 3 or 4 months of Karen and I sitting and mixing and putting all this together, and also trying to find a right tone or sound. We wanted to be modern, but we also wanted to have that warmth that ties in with the elements of their ethnic sonic origins. So, for example, the upright bass itself, we even recorded a part of it on the analog tape just to get that particular warmth, depth, encompasses that feel of Asian instruments or the bowed instruments. So tied in together with the electronic textures, I think working and getting that balance was quite challenging, but I really like what it came out of it at the end. Now here is some very geeky stuff. This is a little flow of how our system works. So The system is spatially tracking all the members of the audience. So as you walk around, the sound objects or some particular sonic occurrences are actually tracking you, and as well, wherever you stand in the 16-channel speaker array, your sonic perception of the world will be different. And it's always that challenge when you are dealing with an acousmatic piece versus multi-channel acoustic piece. In multi-channel acoustic piece, you sit in one single space, you have your seat, you're surrounded by the speakers, and you kind of have some kind of a control what audience is actually listening. When you are in the open AR space, you can be anywhere inside of that sonic occurrence. So whatever you are based inside of the square, your perception will be different. Where we extended the little bit of theory of the sound objects is when we also got you to become a sound object. So you receive your own sonic avatar that kind of follows you. So not just that you are perceiving other sound object, but somebody else is perceiving you as a sound object. And that was the first time that I've ever tried that, and it really worked well. And the challenges of making that happening and going smoothly, there were quite a few, and I think that a result came up to be really impressive. The system itself is also made so we wanted to be able to broadcast this over the web as well, so anything that actually happened could have been sonically virtualized on the binaural output. At the very end, there is a little video that kind of presents you. This is actually like the overview of the 16-channel speaker array, and the little green elements that you see are actual sound objects. So that head in the middle, it's just a central space. Every of those little green sound objects in reality could be and the mirror and the listener in the same time. So this is just a little presentation of how the movement of the sound can create a change and change the context of the sound itself. You will see only one sonic object moving, and the other one are static. So I hope you'll be able to kind of perceive the contrast in between the two.
Thank you so much, Alex.
You're welcome.
Okay, so thank you. Welcome back. Thank you all so much for taking the time to invite us into your brain and creative processes. It's truly incredible to see the behind the scenes details and just how intricate the work entails in order to build this world. Since we do have limited time, I had a fun question, but I'm just going to skip the fun question. I'm going to invite all of the panelists to turn their video back on, and let's get into conversation with each other. I'm still kind of in shock, and I'm marveling at, I'm processing still. So panelists, now that you've seen each other's presentations and have a deeper and nerdier understanding of their individual processes and contribution, let's open up the floor and be in dialogue with one another. Do you have any questions you would like to ask each other?
For the sound design, I think it was Connor, I believe. I really loved I grew up studying music and all that stuff for years, and I felt like it was very, I felt like an emotional connection to a lot of the songs and a lot of the way it was also presented. So I think that's also Alex too. How, it's hard to describe, but like, what kind of personal inspiration did you add to something that is so specific sounding, if that makes any sense? If any,
Uh,
you know?
yeah, that is a fantastic question. I mean, Kieran and I originally became friends because we were the two Punjabi music students at University of Michigan. And so this sort of like having not grown up in a community or having spent a lot of time outside of a community, it's been a really long process of getting to know the music for ourselves and figuring out what it means to us. Um, my dissertation advisor in my PhD program is also a specialist of Chinese music. And I took a class with him. That's how I'm aware of the Guqin in the first place. And he also took us on a field trip to Beijing a few years ago, not months, because that would be during a pandemic, which would be crazy. But yeah, I mean, all of the music I selected, and in terms of, sorry, not selected, but sort of like brought out and showed to Kieran, and then all of the materials that Kieran and I worked together with, we made sure that we had some sort of like emotional connection to it or emotional or intuitive understanding of it so that it wouldn't feel like cultural appropriation. Because that's a very tricky thing, as you, Adam, were saying as well. Like when you have your own cultural identity or personal identity that is different from the materials you're working with, you have to be very honest about what your relationship is to that. I hope that answers your question. It was just like, if we felt it in our heart, if we vibed with it, then we saw if we could use it. If it worked, we used it. If it didn't work, we threw it out. And believe me, there was a lot of material that didn't make it into the final version because it didn't feel organic to what we were all trying to create.
Thank you, Connor. Just such a great experience, the audio experience of the movie and the whole gallery. So thank you.
Yeah, it was tricky, and as Connor said, a lot of it is a process of elimination, and you're right. What really fills you, and how you relate to the culture, and how you interpret the culture. That was a long process, but a lot of it is also, an organic relationship that Kieran and I had in a studio here for a long time. So if it works, and that doesn't work, and then when we start building the interacting system and actually get the people and interacting with the system itself, another process of elimination and changes also came into place.
I'd like to ask a question.
Go for it.
I was wondering, Adam, you mentioned earlier that you had some challenges with whether you could make a Han Chinese wedding dress or an Indian wedding dress. What are some kinds of things that you did in order to overcome the challenge? And if there were any other challenges?
Well, yeah, culture is a funny thing that way. Some of the challenges were like, am I even qualified to make a Han Chinese, wedding dress? Do I want to make something like that? Is that something that I identify with as a designer? And I think it was just the moral dilemma, because like in reality, you could do whatever you want as a designer. You're also responsible for what your audience sees as well. So I think it was like just a moral hang up I had. And I think to avoid all of, in accordance to my own way of dealing with things, it's avoidance. I just tended to avoid kind of like even touching that subject. that's why I kind of like washed it away. And I feel like that actually fit really well for the world. Lucky for me, that it was like kind of just making sure that the culture kind of didn't play a key role in the creation of the dresses themselves. I wanted it to, as you can see, kind of with the silhouette, with of how the, you know, it's particularly Nancy's, it felt like a long, long sleeves and the décolleté very straight across, reminiscent of Chinese gowns, and with Kieran's, it was a two-piece, very reminiscent of Indian wedding pieces with a top and then the long lenga and tuni to go together. But it was like we're moving them way far away from each other with like plastic materials, you know, so that it's kind of, is it kind of cultural? Is it not? And it's also the bodies that fill those dresses too that create that kind of identity of culture as well. I don't know if that answered your question, but I think the challenges I kind of overcame with is really just making sure that it fit into the world correctly, if that makes any sense, with how Nancy and Kieran's culture kind of were in relationship to the world, if that makes sense.
I think you did a fantastic job. It was just interesting to hear your process along the way.
That's actually a really good conversation to keep talking about in terms of whether anyone had any setbacks during the process. You know, obviously, I think it was Connor who had said that collaborating during a pandemic is very strange, right? So apart from the limitations of setbacks, yes. Apart from the limitations of working in a pandemic, what other like tensions or conflict, even creative differences, did anyone experience, if any? And I should remind, it's okay to talk about conflict and tension and creative differences and setbacks.
My setback was that because of the 14-week quarantine, I did not actually get to see the exhibition. I am so upset that I didn't get to see the exhibition because I was visiting family in California and the plans just worked out that, you know, 2-week quarantine, the exhibition closed June 5th. I was out of quarantine the next day, something like that. I arrived June 6th. So I arrived the day after the exhibition closed. I was so upset about that. I'm just like, when there's the next version of the show, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there at the opening. And I'm not going to be in quarantine somewhere.
That's got to be so frustrating. Anyone else?
Unless we have a COVID-20 and then COVID-21 and COVID-22 and COVID-23.
Rio?
I wouldn't say there was any setbacks or anything. I think I just enjoyed being with people. So it's like a positive. It was just nice to like be around others that weren't your normal bubble. And yeah, so I really enjoyed that. I guess the one setback is we couldn't have a wrap party or like an opening party or anything like that. But yeah, for me, I didn't run into any issues really too much.
Oh, I definitely had everything go wrong in my process. I was gonna make I was putting in images of like things that went wrong into my slides, and it was just too many slides. I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna take these all out. But I think every machine that I was printing on broke during the worst possible time. We glued the segments together and clamped it badly, and were like ripping them apart and like peeling epoxy off before it could dry. Dealing with like paint cracking, like problems moving the stuff around. So pretty much everything that could go wrong on my end, I think did go wrong. So thank you very much to Kieran and Nancy for all your patience. But I am very happy with the end result. And I have to say that everybody, I think, did a really beautiful job.
That's amazing because the end result is like so perfect. You would have never guessed.
Well, it was going pretty smooth when Kieran and I worked in my studio, and it was kind of funny. I mean, doing an AR project during a pandemic. Luckily, my house is big, so the first thing was like a rig in my living room with all the cameras and actually speakers that we tried to kind of mimic everything. And then we all hang out at the Nancy Studios. Everything was doing fine, unless just in the last couple of weeks, we actually hit some serious computer glitches between visual and audio, a connection that kind of took Kieran and myself quite a couple of years off of our life, but those were solved, and it's never enough time to work in the actual physical space. The only thing I would say, the only glitch is I wish that I had more time to that we had more time to actually play in the gallery space itself. When you make a cosmetic project, it's so important that you have more time in the actual space where it's going to be performed.
Thanks, Alex. Well, that actually brings me, it's a good segue to my other question, which is let's talk about the idea of completion. Do you consider your piece complete? And then if you had more time, what changes would you have made on your piece or contribution? And then if you're so inclined, follow-up question, what would you do differently, and would you do this again? You can answer any parts of any of the questions or none at all.
I would definitely do this again. Love working with Nancy and Kieran. They're the best. Love them so much. They're such great creatives and so easy to work with. It's just mwah, mwah.
Just the
Chef's
whole
kiss.
team really was just like a dream to work with. So
Period.
Venomous?
Yes, absolutely. I would definitely do it again. One of the things I think if I were to do differently next time, maybe if it wasn't in a pandemic, maybe there would be more cross collaborations with others, because I feel like it was definitely, we all were in our own little mini bubbles within this incredible project.
I'll do this again. I'm looking forward to a sequel.
Okay, take note, Kieran and Nancy. A sequel is coming. So this
feel
is
They
like-
miss me so
I was-
much, right? They don't see me that often.
actually
I was gonna
you
say,
can't.
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I feel like I still have to keep working on it because it's gonna tour again, and the sculpture needs some touching up. So I have this, and I have an ongoing relationship with this sculpture in terms of maintenance. So it's gonna get like a new, more sophisticated paint coat. It's gonna be more gloss, and I think the idea there is that we're going to be able to pick up some of the reflections from the two screens on the figures a little bit more, so they pull in a little bit more of that color with that like little, right now the surface is very matte, it's going to be more glossy ideally.
Was that always the intention, was to have that kind of reflective surface so that it could reflect the films?
Well, not quite reflective, but glossier for
Gloss,
sure. It's
okay.
just incredibly difficult to do.
Right.
Maybe it will start speaking at the end. Sculpture will start to talk back to you.
Ooh. Any other questions for the panelists?
I had a question for Connor, but Adam asked it. So
I'm actually curious, Venomous, because you went through this intensive 13-week design iteration process. I'm curious about like what sorts of questions did you had to ask? And are they different than what you normally would ask as like a graphic designer?
I guess some of the questions usually a brand, you would know a lot about the brand's direction or like their target audience and things like that. So there are a lot of very similar questions in the sense of like, you know, like what is Gaia? Who is Gaia? And like, for these posters that we were making, like who are they targeted to? Like who are the people who will be looking at this within the world? Is that something that we're looking at as someone who's living in that world, or are we looking at it as spectators in the future, and these are documentations of something that has already happened? Like, there's so many different ways you could go about it, but definitely a lot of it was trying to figure out, wrapping my head around like what is all these different elements, like art, what is Gaia, Damon, Core, and what do they want to say about themselves versus what they really are.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. One of my favorite questions to ask artists is audience, and whether you have a specific audience in mind when you're working with your piece or through your artistic process. In this case, where it's so like you're working with multiple layers and multiple people and multiple departments. Does anyone have like an imaginary audience that they're working with, or is the audience very tangible? There's a question in there somewhere, I think.
I always start by imagining my mom is in the audience. If I can explain it to her and she can understand it, especially like the cultural references, then that's a good start.
Yeah.
Not everybody feels that way. That's totally up to them. No judgment there. But I know that when I talk, my mom just hears gibberish, especially when I'm like deep in sort of academic or theoretical thought. She's like, Connor, you just said words, but I didn't understand a single thing you said. But yeah, ideally, a general art audience, but also the different cultural audiences that are being targeted or pulled in. I also like to think that everybody brings in something different. There's not a neutral audience, there's not a universal audience. And for that reason, the work is sort of the totality of everything everybody brings into it.
Mm-hmm.
As well as in the collaboration. I haven't met most of you. I would love to meet all of you and just like pick your brains more, or just, see what comes out of this next.
Okay, so in the last kind of couple of minutes, I promised this, which is if you have any questions for Kieran and Nancy, this is your opportunity to grill the co-creators. You can see them flipping out. I did give them a warning, but this is really your time to ask them questions now.
Okay, I have a question. If you were to do this again, what would you do differently?
That's a big one. There's a lot of things that I would do differently.
Top three, yeah. Let's say.
Top three. Top three. I feel like we need to like huddle and talk about this. Yeah. I think like the team, we all chose the team was fine. Like the team was like the best part. Yeah, we wouldn't swap. We wouldn't swap any of you out.
Nice,
but like. But I think I think all of you guys knew the process. Like dealing with the institution was like kind of hard for us too, and I'm sure you guys were all witnessing the entire, like for the last year, the duration of working within an institution and the kind of roadblocks that you meet with that. So I guess like that's the only thing that I can imagine doing differently, is like maybe communicating differently or going with an even more prepared plan on how to execute this project, because so much of I'm sure you guys all know, so much of the floor plan had to evolve during the installation of the piece, and some of you guys were there for it. So yeah, like having a more realistic plan. But I mean,
but also knowing, like, I don't know, I just don't see how much more communication thought process we could have had. But I guess maybe like doing more like previous like checks on how other artists have worked in that space, and like talking to other folks that have worked with that institution, and then seeing how we could go about or framing our project based on other people's experience.
And
that was the biggest thing we didn't know, and it wasn't until like after the fact that we were like, oh, this is a precedent.
Yeah, and we really, honestly, like, I'm so like grateful that like you guys were all able to like support us through that process, because I'm sure you guys saw a lot of the like back end and like the kind of headaches that kind of came through the process. So I think at the end of the day, it was like like I think our team like really pulled through and was able to offer us a lot of like emotional support. Through the process of like making this work. Like I felt like the union team and the collaborators were kind of like our therapy kind of group in some ways, to kind of show up and like hold space for us.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, the weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings, during the pandemic, during the winter months. It really felt like we all came together, and we're this union group that, as Nancy said, held space and grew together too.
And it was nice to get to know everybody a little bit more too. I think, it was definitely challenging. I think we did this is a very challenging project, not just like for us, I'm sure for all of you individually, like the different elements that you have to think about. Like to grow through that tension as well, because there was definitely a lot of really stressful moments, and to be able to like persevere through those stressful moments deepened all of this relationship.
Would you ever consider of splitting a project in its own episodes, like video as one episode, gallery presentation in its own episode, interactive media part as its own episode? The reason that I'm saying that, it was a great thing, but sometimes I thought that we overwhelmed the public with too many things in the same time, and they just couldn't chew enough what we gave them. I mean, that's why I'm asking that.
It's definitely something that we're down to explore. I mean, like, making a longer film or a longer interactive installation or sculpture. Who knows? More sculpture, right, Ian?
Yeah. My question was going to be, what would you do differently, Nancy? Would you do less sanding next time?
Yo, my hands were hella busted, but like as soon as I finished, I went to get my nails done. But like I was not going to do. I just didn't have that kind of capability. But I appreciate like I have an appreciation for material practices for sure. So thanks Ian, and thanks Rio and Adam for all your material work.
You were doing great. I've seen you right in the Chinatown. You were just in your zen, just polishing. It was awesome.
Because I just had to do like 8 hours of it a day. Like you just had to do the time, or else it just wouldn't get done.
Thanks, everyone. We have unfortunately run out of time. I wish we could continue this conversation further. It doesn't look like there are any questions from the audience. So if you have any last minute questions or observations or comments or even nice words, feel free to drop in the chat now. I want to say that this was just an incredible and inspiring panel. I have a lot to process, so I'll keep my words minimal. Are there any announcements that we need to make? Actually, first of all, Nancy and Kieran, did you want to say any last minute words before I get Zen Evolution too?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for being involved in this project. And, as much as it was our baby, being able to share it with all of you and have it grow and manifest into that exhibition was a really beautiful thing to experience, especially during this really hard year for everyone. And I also want to thank everyone at Sin Evolution for their support, because there was absolutely no way we could have done this project without them. Yeah, and thank you, Jen, for hosting us.
Thank you. Sin Evolution, Yumjo.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you to everyone, all of the panelists and all of the collaborators, including the folks who are not here with us today, and Nancy and Kieran. It's been such an incredible show, and yeah, I'm excited. I also am super upset that I didn't get to see the exhibition because I've been stuck in Taiwan the whole time. But hopefully we'll get to tour the exhibition, to Taipei, to Kaohsiung, to, hopefully to Mumbai and Delhi. That would be amazing down the road. But thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jen, as well, for facilitating this incredible discussion. I feel so privileged to be able to get a glimpse into the behind the scenes process, and just like all of the thought that went into the details of the world building. Yeah, so I think this is also one of our last public events for Digital Carnival Z this year. There's a couple more days if anybody in the audience, or if the panelists have the chance to check out the festival website. We would love to have your feedback as well. There's some really interesting tie-ins between some of the online festival works and also the Union exhibition. So yeah, thank you again, everyone. And I hope to meet you all in person someday, and maybe a party is in order, I think.
Thank you, everyone. It was a blast. Until the
Thank
next
you.
time.
Bye.
Thank you.